Right.
Um, I really appreciate you wanting to speak on this. First of all, let me see, Jeff Simpson, Simpson, and you are with the Fraternal Order of Police, Capital City Lodge 9, I believe, Executive Vice President.
Yes, sir. I'm number 2. I'm right underneath the president. I've been on the board since 2005, worked my way up through the ranks. I'm a Columbus policeman of 23 years, but I've held position on the board since 2005, so I've been around a long time.
I appreciate you reaching out to me about this. I know that this was a story yesterday, that it was a talker, to say the least. Your thoughts on this? Your thoughts after seeing the body camera footage, and about protocol for police. Your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate it. We can always pick, back and forth with the media and in relations with the police, that. But I slept on this one, and it first started with Channel 4, and I saw they aired it. So, I try not to get emotional. And when I saw it, I was like, what's the story? And when I mean, what's the story? It's like, what's the purpose, right? What journalistic value? Who are we in informing? And I watched the video. And like I said, I've been on 23 years. I've been a policeman since I was 19 years old with military service. And I, for the life of me, did not get the story at all on why it was. I didn't think it was represented correctly, to be quite honest with you. I didn't see any racial bias. Mr. I don't know how to, is it Allaway?
Alawali?
Alawali. Mr. Alawali in himself, by his own admission, it's very clear that he understood the reason for the contact from the officers. He didn't make a complaint. He didn't contact Westerville PD. He said the officers were polite. He gave reason that he acknowledged that the reason for the encounter, the contact, was reasonable. And where he got upset is when they were going to run his ID. He gave them his ID. To be specific, I just want to give a little lead in on why I asked to talk. So I saw that 10 and 6 ran the story, and I'm like, is that just following along or what? And that's why I reached out to you. But police are supposed to be held accountable. We get that. But what this story here is, there couldn't be further from any racial bias. I mean, the officers were out. It's Westerville. It's a Saturday around noon. It's in a business complex. It's a little unusual to see someone with a car pulled up next to a dumpster throwing big black plastic bags into a dumpster. So they pull up, very kind and polite. I think they were a little too kind and polite, because it's clear that Mr. Awali, that he's really dismissive. He's kind of, in my opinion, it's clear he's passive aggressive. They ask him, they were very nice to him, ask him what's going on. He offered his business card. Okay, so he gives him his business card. We're working towards the steps of legitimacy here, because not everybody tells us the truth. So they get the business card. They start to ask him other couple questions, because it is illegal to dump on someone's private property. Mm-hmm. And it's a misdemeanor 3rd degree. You could go to jail for it. So he steps it up and says, I'll get you my ID. They didn't even ask him for his ID. But if you notice, it's all about how you do contact with the police. In my opinion, it's clear he's very dismissive with the officers. Like I said, passive aggressive. The normal person would stop what they're doing, give the officers their attention, answer the questions, and engage them one-on-one. Well, he gives them the card and goes back, and he's literally, while they're trying to talk to him, he's continuing about his day with dumping his garbage. He turns his back to the officers. So obviously, he couldn't perceive them as a threat. And then he continues just to do his thing, like very dismissive, like he was bothered that they were contacting him. It may seem trivial to him, but in the police's eyes, yes, it wasn't the crime of the, that we're using, wasn't a robbery or something like that, but it is an issue. And all the police needed was reasonable suspicion to stop and make contact with him. They never even made it to probable cause. The law is the law. It was reasonable suspicion. The contact was appropriate. And once he asked, the officer flips open his notepad and we do what we do. We write down your information. They could have ran his tag if they wanted to. I don't know if they did, but it's all in plain view. That's what we do. And then when Mr. Awali objected to having his ID ran, the officers could have held their ground and stayed firm, well within their rights to do that. And they didn't. They gave him his ID back. And you hear on the tape, on the body worn camera, it was a training car. The veteran officer said, "Hey, we already have the information. Let's just get out of here and run it." They didn't want any problems. At that point, it appears something, it's legit and they don't want the confrontation, which they had every right to run the license. And as a matter of fact, they did not run his license through leads. They entered it into their mobile database, which creates a documentation of who they saw there and just their name. That's it. That's all.
I wanted to ask you about that because yesterday when I talked to Mr. Alawali, I asked him point blank, was this, to his understanding, against the law to do? And you're saying no. From a law enforcement standpoint, officers are allowed to document, they're allowed to write down, they're allowed to, if they wanted to, they could have ran his plate, they could have ran his license. That is legal.
Absolutely. They could have did all that stuff. Absolutely. And I'm telling you, with all my service, a 26-year veteran, absolutely. They never got to the point of probable cause to make an arrest. They just had reasonable suspicion. There's a guy who's dumping. That's an issue. It happens all the time. People don't like it. So they just rolled up and asked him a couple questions. And I'm not trying to over exaggerate the issue, but Ted Bundy was caught. He was pulled over a ton by officers and they never ran his stuff. It was just a simple traffic stop. Oh, and he was a smooth talker. And I don't want you to misquote that in any way, shape, or form. I'm just telling you from a police perspective that I'm referring Mr. Alawadi to him, but there's a reason for it and he was caught by an old veteran officer that pulled him over. It was a traffic light or license plate light. And he's the one that ran his license. And when he ran his license, it popped up that he was a murder suspect. That's how he got caught. Mm-hmm. So we don't know. I mean, we don't know what that person has in there. Let's put it this way, stuff happens. We just had a murder in Westerville here that's been under a big investigation. You don't know what that guy's throwing out or what he's doing. And it's a little bit odd. At the end of the day, was he breaking the law? No. But the officers had every obligation to check him out. And like I said, the guy even admitted that everything was correct. The confrontation, I meant to say, he said accosted. Accosted, again, passive aggressive. That means that they went up and challenged him aggressively. I don't think anyone within reason on this one can say that the officers challenged him aggressively at all. I mean, they were kind, cooperative. And I just don't see why the story had to be tied to race. This is why actually the guy stepped into his car twice, reached into his car twice. The officers would have had every right to order him not to do that. An average person, average reasonable person, and I would tell you this for your daughters, yourself, even myself, if I get pulled over, I put my windows down, my keys are out of the car. If an officer comes up to me and asks me a question, even as a policeman, I don't say the first thing out of my mouth, I'm Jeff Simpson. They don't know who I am. I just comply. It's really easy. But really, he kind of passively aggressively gave them a hard time. But to pull race or anything into that, it's a touchy subject because the officers could have just drove right by and say if there was criminal activity afoot, the guy would have been able to do it. In a society now, you see everybody questioning, why are we not hiring officers? Why can't we get people to do this job? Why is there massive retirements? Why is traffic stops down? In the city of Columbus, we usually average about 3,500 a month. We're down to 400. Well, this is a perfect example why. And I'm not painting the media with a broad brush, but we all have to do our best to communicate with the citizens. But there was nothing to suggest race. But the next time the officer just might drive by. This is why traffic stops are down, because why risk just what happened here? If it was a legitimate concern, then I'm just trying to be really reasonable about this. Then make a complaint. Call the chief. Westerville is an easy place to access. He's obviously a business owner there. He knows what to do. I read up on him. He's a personal injury attorney that's tried civil cases. So I don't know about him being a civil rights attorney. But let's just say if that's true, he knows the process, right? If that's all true, but why go to social media? So what's going to happen is this story trickles down all through Central Ohio, and that's a reason for an officer to do one less traffic stop, one less contact when they do see something suspicious, where something that they could have stopped. It could be a burglary suspect who's in a parking lot like that. You just never know. They never detained him, never infringed upon his rights. And I think we got to be very careful about that, because we're seeing this pendulum, this climate across the country, and it's real data. And there's a reason why it's happening. And there's a reason why officers are pulling back. And it's because of situations like this. Drive right past. Unless you're called, don't be proactive. But we still want to be police, and we still want to do the right thing and keep people safe. But that comes with the price of being on the news or social media or having this stuff done. And I really feel, I never forget where I came from. I was a patrol officer, but I feel for the guys on the street, because I guarantee you, this will cause other officers, not just in Westerville, to be even more skittish to do their job.
I want to ask you about that. The protocol aspect. You mentioned Ted Bundy. If memory serves me right, I believe Timothy McVeigh was also caught on a similar traffic stop. So obviously not saying that Mr. Alawali is in any way, shape, or form in that same basket. However, we're talking protocol. We're talking police protocol. And you also mentioned the climate that we've seen over the last year. Some big cases, of course, George Floyd. Do you think that this climate that we are in, and the fact that social media, it is so quick, people reading social media are so quick to cast judgment, are so quick to believe something for the truth, whether they know both sides or not. Does this, going back to protocol, does the climate, does social media, does that impact policing protocol for the foreseeable future, for long-term effects?
Absolutely. And it's dangerous. We get paid to be dangerous, to be in dangerous situations, but every officer has a heart, and they want to protect the citizens. And what it does is it affects you, your family, and every citizen here in Central Ohio and across the country. Absolutely. Social media has emboldened people to have their say, and sometimes get the attention, their 5 minutes of fame, without accountability. You would think a reasonable person, that's a pretty serious allegation to make a racial connection to a police contact. I mean, that's a federal violation. There's a lot of issues that come with that. That's very serious. So him being an attorney, if it was real, if it was a legitimate thing, then why not call the police chief? Why not make a complaint? And why not have it addressed? But I believe social media empowers people to say what they want, interpret things how they want, with absolutely no accountability. And people, unfortunately, believe what they read, and they don't want to take the time sometimes to look into it. Even before I called you and called the other news stations, I literally slept on it, and I watched that video about 4 times to really try to get it from both perspectives. And I was at a loss of why this was turned or portrayed into a racial incident. And I was concerned on the platform that Mr. Alawali chose to voice his concerns. I mean, he said, like I said, accosted. He was not accosted. It's passive aggressive. I mean, he said he was treated fine. But yeah, it's a huge concern. And unfortunately, not only is it directly impacting police productivity, the increase in crime, it's impacting the safety of the citizens and the officers. Sometimes I see officers being really unsafe because if they pull their gun in a situation they're supposed to, or get aggressive in a situation they should. They're worried about being on YouTube. It has nothing to do with accountability. We sign up for that. We know that we're accountable, that we can go to prison, we can get fired if we break the rules. But this social media standard, this, I will say, this political standard that's penetrated the law, that I believe, that's some scary stuff. And now it comes to where officers can get indicted, have their careers ended or ruined by just being in the media. I can give you an example of that if you'd like, but I'm trying to answer your question directly.
No, that's totally okay. I appreciate you taking the time to voice this. I mean, I think this is a very important aspect of this conversation, and I appreciate you taking the time. I'll go ahead and stop